Elara Voss had never shifted, not once. In 23 years of life, had her body answered the call of the moon the way every other wolf in her pack could. The elders called it the curse of silence. The younger wolves called her worse things behind closed doors, and sometimes to her face. She had grown used to lowered eyes and averted shoulders whenever she walked through the village, used to being the girl nobody wanted near their children, their livestock, or their weddings, in case her bad luck rubbed off on something that mattered. So when the pack elders gathered her into the meeting hall on a cold morning in early autumn, she assumed she was about to be punished again for something she had not done. Instead, they told her she was being given away. The kingdom of Duskmere had grown tired of the border disputes with her small, struggling pack. King Alaric Thornwood, the alpha who ruled from the Stone City at the heart of the Wolflands, had sent word that a tribute would settle the matter without bloodshed. A servant, useful and quiet, to work in his household as a gesture of goodwill. The elders had not hesitated. Elara was the obvious choice. She was, after all, the pack's greatest embarrassment, and here was a chance to turn that embarrassment into peace. Nobody asked how she felt about it. Nobody ever did. The journey to the capital took 3 days by cart, and Elara spent most of it staring at the passing trees, wondering what waited for her at the end of the road. She had heard stories about King Alaric, the way people always hear stories about kings they will never meet. He was said to be strong enough to have taken the throne at 22 after his father's death, disciplined enough to have held it through 5 years of political storms, and cold enough that even his own generals were careful with their words around him. She pictured a hard, joyless man, sitting on a throne built from other people's fear. What she found, when she was finally brought before him in the great hall of Duskmere Castle, was something else entirely. Alaric Thornwood was younger than she expected, with dark hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that came from years of holding power carefully, like a blade he had learned not to swing without reason. He did not look at the other tribute wolves standing beside her, the ones offering skins and grain and promises of loyalty. He looked at Elara, and he did not look away. It happened in an instant, the way lightning happens. One moment the room was full of noise and formality, and the next, everything narrowed to the space between them. Elara felt it too, a pull low in her chest, unfamiliar and frightening, as though some part of her recognized him from a life she could not remember living. She had heard of mate bonds before. She had never expected to feel one, certainly not with a king, and certainly not while dressed in a plain traveling cloak with dust still on her boots. "You," Alaric said, his voice quiet, but carrying easily across the hall. "What is your name?" "Elara," she managed. "Elara Voss." He stepped down from the dais, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. His advisors exchanged glances. One of them, an older wolf named Cassian, who served as his chief counselor, opened his mouth as if to intervene, then closed it again at a single look from the king. "She is Omega," someone murmured from the crowd, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to pretend otherwise. "Cursed, she has never shifted." Alaric did not seem to care. He reached out, and though he did not touch her, he held his hand near hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "I don't know what this is," he said, so quietly it seemed meant only for her, "but I am not going to pretend I don't feel it." By nightfall, the entire castle knew that King Alaric had claimed the tribute Omega as his mate. The following weeks were not kind to Elara. The court wolves, proud and highborn, made no secret of their disdain. They whispered about her lineage, her rank, her inability to shift, as though these were personal failures rather than accidents of birth. She was given fine rooms and fine clothes, but she wore them like borrowed things, always aware that she did not belong among the tapestries and polished floors of the castle. Cassian, the chief counselor, was the most vocal of her critics, though he was careful never to be openly cruel. He simply made his opinions known through careful words and careful silences. "A king's mate must be a symbol of strength," he told Alaric once, within Elara's hearing, though she suspected that was not an accident. "What does it say about Duskmere if our king's chosen mate is an Omega who cannot even shift?" Alaric's answer was short and final. "It says that I do not choose based on what others expect of me." Still, the words stung, and Elara found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her new chambers, wondering if she had simply traded one kind of shame for another. In the village, she had been an outcast among equals. Here, she was an outcast surrounded by wolves, who considered themselves her betters in every way that mattered. And yet, there were moments that made the ache bearable. Alaric sought her out in the evenings, when the business of the kingdom finally released him. He was not, she learned, the cold man his reputation suggested. He asked about her life before Duskmere, listened when she spoke of the pack that had cast her aside, and did not flinch when she admitted, quietly, that she sometimes wondered if the elders had been right to call her cursed. "You are not cursed," he told her one night, as they sat together in the quiet of the castle gardens. "You are unusual. Those are not the same thing." She wanted to believe him. She was not sure she could. It was around this time that strange things began happening near her chambers, small at first, easy to dismiss. Flowers that should have withered weeks ago bloomed brighter than ever along her windowsill. An old warding stone set into the corridor outside her room, one that had not glowed in living memory, began to hum faintly whenever she passed. The castle's oldest servants, the ones who remembered stories no one else did, started giving her strange, searching looks, as though trying to place a face they had seen somewhere long ago. Ilara noticed, but she said nothing. She had spent her whole life being strange. She had learned not to draw attention to it. Then came the night of the attack. It happened during a formal gathering, a rare occasion when representatives from the northern territories came to negotiate trade agreements with Duskmere. The hall was full of nobles and dignitaries, the air thick with tension that had nothing to do with Ilara for once. She stood near the edge of the room, as she often did at these events, comfortable in the shadows where no one expected her to speak. The first sign of danger was a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable to anyone raised among wolves. Ilara felt it before she understood it, a wrongness threading through the crowd. Then a man near the front of the hall moved too quickly, a blade catching the candlelight as he lunged toward the dais where Alaric stood. Ilara did not think. She moved. She was not fast enough to stop the blade entirely, but she was fast enough to place herself between it and the king. The pain that followed was sharp and immediate, tearing through her side as the assassin's weapon found her instead of its intended target. The hall erupted into chaos, guards rushing forward, Alaric's voice rising above the noise as he caught her before she could fall. "Ilara." His voice cracked around her name, in a way she had never heard from him before. "Ilara, stay with me." She wanted to answer him, wanted to tell him she was fine, but the pain was overwhelming, and beneath it, something else was stirring, something that had been sleeping inside her for 23 years and had finally been shaken awake. Her skin began to glow. It was not the shift she had spent her whole life failing to achieve. There was no fur, no claws, no wolf shape rising to meet the moon. Instead, light poured from beneath her skin like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, and the pain in her side faded, replaced by something vast and unfamiliar, a power that did not feel like it belonged to a wolf at all. The hall fell silent. Even the guards restraining the assassin paused, staring at the light rising from the fallen Omega in the king's arms. When the glow finally faded, Ilara opened her eyes to find herself unharmed, the wound at her side closed, as though it had never been there. Alaric stared down at her, his expression somewhere between fear and wonder, and around them, the nobles who had spent weeks mocking her rank now looked at her the way one looks at something too large to understand. It was Cassian, of all people, who finally broke the silence, his voice hushed with something that sounded almost like awe. "Fane," he said. "She is Fane." Ilara had never heard the word before, but she would learn it well in the days that followed. The Fane, according to the oldest texts in Duskmere's library, were beings that had existed long before the first wolf pack bonded with the moon, older than werewolf law, older than the kingdoms built upon it. They were tied to the ancient forest known as the Black Pine, a place most wolves avoided out of old, half-remembered fear. It was said the Fane could heal, could grow things from barren ground, could sense truths hidden from ordinary eyes. It was also said that the bloodline had vanished centuries ago, hunted, or hidden, or simply lost to time. Ilara had not vanished. She had simply been buried beneath generations of wolf blood, her inheritance silent and unseen, until the night her body finally chose to answer a call, older than the one she had spent her whole life waiting for. The revelation did not bring peace. If anything, it deepened the divide within the court. Some nobles, frightened by power they did not understand, argued that she should be watched closely, perhaps even confined, for the safety of the kingdom. Others, more calculating, saw an opportunity, whispering about the political advantages of a queen with abilities no wolf possessed. And from beyond Duskmere's borders, word came that the Black Pine itself had stirred, sending a quiet emissary to the castle gates, asking to see the one who carried its old blood. Elara stood in the middle of all of it, uncertain which version of herself was real. Was she the Omega the pack had discarded, the mate the court still resented, the Fane the ancient forest wanted to reclaim? For the first time in her life, she was not being told she was too little. Now, everyone seemed to think she was too much. It was Alaric who found her that night, standing alone at the edge of the castle gardens, staring toward the dark line of trees on the horizon where the Black Pine began. "They want you to choose," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "The court, the forest. Even my own advisors, everyone wants to decide what you are." "And what do you want?" she asked, not looking at him. He was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to choose for yourself, whatever that means. Wolf, Fane, both, neither. I did not claim you because of what you could become. I claimed you because of who you already were, standing in that hall with dust on your boots, and no expectations of kindness from anyone in it." Elara finally turned to look at him, and for the first time since arriving in Duskmere, she did not feel like a burden being passed between hands that did not want her. She felt, instead, like someone standing at the beginning of a choice that was entirely her own to make. She thought of the pack that had called her cursed, of the court that had called her unworthy, of the ancient forest that now called her one of its own. None of them, she realized, had ever asked her what she wanted. They had only ever told her what she was. "I am not finished deciding," she said finally. "But whatever I become, I want to decide it standing here, not there." She glanced toward the tree line, then back toward the castle behind them. "Here, with you." Alaric's hand found hers, and this time, he did not hesitate to hold it. In the weeks that followed, Elara did not disappear into the Black Pine, nor did she shrink back into the quiet, apologetic Omega she had once been forced to become. She began to study what she was, guided by old texts and older instincts, learning to shape the strange light within her rather than fear it. The court, slowly and reluctantly, learned to see her as something more than a curse turned inconvenient miracle. Cassian, in time, became one of her staunchest defenders, humbled by the power he had once dismissed. And when Alaric finally stood before his people to name her not merely his mate, but his queen, no one in the hall dared to whisper the word cursed again. Elara Voss, once cast aside as broken, once dismissed as nothing more than a bargaining chip between kingdoms, took her place beside the Alpha King, not because an ancient bloodline demanded it, but because she had finally chosen it for herself. And far beyond the castle walls, in the old, silent heart of the Black Pine, something ancient settled at last, content to wait and watch over the one who had finally come home to her own power, on her own terms.